Flawcast, episode 224. Who's afraid of the dire wolf? Genetic power's the most awesome force the planet's ever seen, but you wield it like a kid who's found his dad's gun. Dr. Ian Malcolm.
Flawcast, get in the arena.
All right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. All of our esteemed Flawcast listeners want to welcome and thank everybody back to a brand new, thought-provoking, potentially triggering episode of Flawcast. I am riding solo this week. Mr. Tuckerson is being accosted by the man and he is not able to join us. However, there was something that I really wanted to discuss in something of a timely matter that I feel like will be of interest to at least some of you. So let's get the shaking howdy out of the way and then we'll dive right into it. So I just want to welcome all of our new listeners, our new subscribers, which, by the way, those who listen but who haven't subscribed or haven't followed, please consider doing that. That does help. It does help our episodes and our podcasts get pushed higher up the line of visibility, and the algorithms and the AI takeovers and all that fun stuff does help with getting us more traction. So we do appreciate that. We appreciate everybody who's sharing. I see on social media, sharing with their friends. It just means so much, and it definitely helps. So just ask to please continue to share. You can find us anywhere podcast stars. Just search Flawcast, CLE, Apple, Spotify, Breaker, Anchor.fm. You can find us on the video platform Rumble. That is under Flawed Inc. In the description of this episode, there is a link to pick up a copy of my book, Smith's Heart of Man Repair Manual, and I do have some on hand. Some of you have been asking, so I'm more than happy to get you one of those in person as well. Our email is flawedinccle@gmail.com. And have any questions, comments, or concerns, send them there and they will be dealt with appropriately. So without any further ado, the episode 223, which was last week's episode, was so well received by so many of you. This week is going to follow that same trajectory. And I just think it's so important that we arm ourselves with knowledge. The knowledge of the holy, the knowledge of the spiritual or supernatural world that we are always walking and navigating through. Knowledge of the natural world that helps lead us through the supernatural world. And there's so many things happening right now that on the surface might just seem mundane, or even as they are being touted or promoted as a breakthrough, and I'm going to get into that in a moment. But what I really want to talk about is this Michael Crichton-esque, Jurassic Park-esque reintroduction of the dire wolves. And I'm going to get into a little bit, but before we do anything, the reason why, because some people have asked, the reason why it's important we talk about these things isn't to be some fringe, some cool conspiracy theory podcast, which I love those podcasts. I love that kind of stuff. Anyone who knows me even remotely knows that Alex Jones and InfoWars are my go-tos for all things news related. However, what time and what discovery has unveiled to us is that the conspiracy theorists, generally speaking, have been more right than wrong. And I really feel, for me, one of my life verses is Hosea 4:6, and you guys hear me talk about it regularly, but in the King James it says, "My people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge." And that's what we're going to get into today. And I want to present an angle that maybe we haven't considered, maybe we haven't looked at. And the idea of genetic modification has been going on as long as time has been recorded. So I just want to get into a couple Bible verses up front. I know normally we kind of hit that at the end, but this episode is going to be so dense in knowledge that I need to have the word up front so that we navigate these things and we understand what Jesus is speaking about in Matthew 24, that we understand what the word of God is and what Holy Spirit is revealing to us in this time. And if we look in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 9 from the Amplified, it says, "That which has been is that which will be again, and that which has been done is that which will be done again. So there is nothing new under the sun." And I know that's a catchphrase even in pop culture, but there is nothing new under the sun. Everything we see has already been done. Hey, the poet didn't even know it. But how most people believe Solomon was the writer of Ecclesiastes, and when he says that which has been is what will be again. We are seeing this now with the dire wolves. I also want to read, and this is going to be something scriptural, but I'm going to get into other texts later in the episode. But this is something we talk a lot about. We talk a lot about the Nephilim. We talk about the spiritual genetic modification that in Genesis 6, I'm going to read verses 1 to 8 from the Amplified. We talk about this a lot because more and more this is becoming so prevalent that we understand what occurred, why God had to destroy the earth. But in Genesis 6, verse 1, "Now it happened when men began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful and desirable, and they took wives for themselves, whenever they chose and desired. Then the Lord said, My spirit will not strive and remain with man forever, because he is indeed flesh, sinful, corrupt, given over to sensual appetites. Nevertheless, his days shall yet be 120 years. There were Nephilim, men of stature, notorious men, upon the earth in those days, and also afterwards. Then the sons of God lived with the daughters of men, and they gave birth to their children. These were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown, great reputation, fame. The Lord saw the wickedness, the depravity of man was great on the earth, and that every imagination or intent of the thoughts of his heart were only evil continually. The Lord regretted that he made mankind on the earth, and he was deeply grieved in his heart. So the Lord said, I will destroy, annihilate mankind who I have created from the surface of the earth. Not only man, but the animals and the crawling things and the birds of the air, because it deeply grieves me to see mankind sin. So I regret that I have made them. But Noah found favor and grace in the eyes of the Lord. And that's where we see that Noah and his wife and sons and daughters-in-law were spared. We need to look at what it says here in Genesis 6, that God was grieved, that God regretted making men, and it happened after these fallen entities did these horrific evil things with the daughters of men. So these supernatural spiritual entities, and this is Bible, this isn't my opinion, they took women, did unspeakable things, and they mated. They had offspring, if you will. And what we see from that are these spiritually genetic modified entities. We need to look at the words of Christ here in Matthew 24. I'm going to read verses 37 to 39 from the Amplified. It says, For the coming of the Son of Man, the Messiah, will be just like the days of Noah. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage until the very day that Noah entered the ark. And they did not know or understand until the flood came and swept it all away. So will the coming of the Son of Man be. Unexpected judgment. So there's a very important thing that, well, everything that Jesus says is important, but there's a very important thing that he specifically says there, that at the return of the Son of Man, so when he comes back, the days on the earth are going to be just like the days of Noah, that the days that Noah occupied, which you read about in Genesis chapter 6. We saw these detestable things happening. We saw humans coalescing. And I can understand how if you have a daughter that's beautiful and you have this supernatural entity, especially then, like, are you going to throw a rock at it? Are you... you're going to poke it with a spear. And there's an understanding that what are you able to do? And what I'm wondering is, we have that technology of that day where those entities overrode it. And whether they had nuclear weapons at that time or whether they have the advancements that we have now, I don't think it matters. There's a guy who hosts a podcast, Steve Quayle is his name. One of the best things I ever heard him say was, you cannot fix spiritual issues with earthly decisions. Everything is a spiritual decision. So I'm going to play a clip about the dire wolves. It's not too long. Take a listen. For those who are unaware of what I'm going to be talking about, give a listen to this clip.
We turn now to that remarkable scientific breakthrough. 13,000 years after the last dire wolf walked the earth, scientists say they've now brought them back. Here's our chief national correspondent, Matt Gutman, with the video tonight.
Tonight, a howl 13,000 years in the making. In a first for science, biotech company Colossal Biosciences says it brought the extinct direwolf back to life, a species that hasn't walked the earth since the Stone Age.
The direwolf is the first de-extinct species.
Well known from HBO's hit show Game of Thrones, ABC News given exclusive access into Colossal's lab in Dallas, where scientists are using genes from gray wolves to create dire wolves.
We've taken a gray wolf genome, a gray wolf cell, which is already genetically 99.5% identical to dire wolves, and we've edited those cells at multiple places in its DNA sequence to contain the dire wolf version of the DNA. That animal looks like a dire wolf, it will behave like a dire wolf, and it is a dire wolf.
Now, 7 months old, dire wolves Romulus and Remus eating well and getting bigger every day. And David, the company tells us they're not stopping there. They plan to have woolly mammoths roaming the earth again by 2028. But critics argue that this de-extinction could harm fragile ecosystems. David?
Yeah, the images are really something, Matt. Thank you.
So that was a real brief news report of what happened and what's going on with these dire wolves. Now, these things are adorable. I'm not even going to lie. These things have not been around for multiple millennia. And, you know, the wolves and the dogs that we have now, which dogs are descended from wolves, are not the same thing. As that report says, I'm going to just reemphasize with this article. And this is from USA Today, written by Janet Locher. The dire wolf went extinct 13,000 years ago. What to know about this colossal beast, which is clever when you realize the name of the company that is Colossal Biosciences that reintroduced these. A U.S. company has taken a step aimed at bringing the dire wolf back from oblivion. Dallas-based Colossal Biosciences have announced the birth of these genetically engineered wolf pups, all with striking white fur, created from the help of ancient DNA obtained from fossilized remains of the extinct animals. What do we know about these prehistoric wolves? Dire wolves went extinct roughly 13,000 years ago. Their skeletal remains have been found in North and South America, according to the National Park Service. But many people were introduced to the dire wolf by George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire fantasy book series, which are the basis of HBO's TV series Game of Thrones. How were these genetically engineered? And I want to get a little deeper into this because the guy who is a part of this Colossal Biosciences was on Joe Rogan recently and explained it. But this says, Colossal scientists extracted ancient DNA from 2 dire wolf fossils. A tooth from Idaho, roughly 72,000 years old. 20 genes of gray wolves were edited, and with DNA to include dire wolves traits in these were implemented in surrogate domestic dog mothers. 3 different dogs gave birth to the pups. So this is literally what Michael Crichton wrote about when he wrote the Jurassic Park book, and which, you know, now we have, what's it going to be, 7 films genomes. But literally, the gentleman on the Joe Rogan show went a lot deeper. Not only did they extract from a tooth, but they found there's a very dense bone right where the neck and the skull kind of connect, and they extracted DNA elements from that, which gave them a more defined definition of these quote-unquote dire wolves and what allegedly separates them from modern gray wolves, which they've combined the DNAs. And if you remember, if you watched Jurassic Park or if you read the book, they took these fossilized DNA that they found and they mixed it with like frogs, with snakes, with lizards, just different things to create these genetic hybrids. The thing that alarms me, and I want to really dig into this, and this is kind of where the tie between the Nephilim and these abominations that were created out of the fall of man or the fall of these spiritual entities in Genesis chapter 6. This is kind of where I'm going and kind of what concerns me. So it says, how big were dire wolves? They were 25% larger than modern-day gray wolves. Dire wolves had thicker, more muscular legs, more powerful shoulders, and a wider head and snout with large jaws and teeth. It stood about 3.5 feet tall, could be longer than 6 feet, and weigh up to 150 pounds. That's a big dog. And this is average. Dire wolf skulls were significantly larger than gray wolves, which are what the wolves they combined the DNA from to create these things. The dire wolf was very similar to the present-day gray wolf, but was much heavier with a larger, more robust skull. There is evidence that the skulls were significantly enhanced for the attachment of the strong muscular jaws. So much like in Jurassic Park, they have created these entities which they don't understand that has been separated from the land of the living for over 13,000 years. These things are much bigger than average wolves, than your average dog. I think seeing the video and listening to the guy in Joe Rogan, these things are 5 months old, weighing over 80 pounds. That's enormous. The average growth cycle of a wolf or dog, they do their massive growing in their first 18 months. I mean, at 5 months, they weigh 80 pounds. There's no doubt in my mind these things are going to at least double. And that should be concerning because we don't know. They've reintroduced something that, first off, wasn't original. They've reintroduced the idea of these things that were chosen. They did not survive, and they did not make it through time for whatever reason. They were chosen to be weeded out, and that should be concerning. But what's even more concerning is the known history of genetic modification. Keep all that dire wolf stuff in mind. I'm just going to go over a couple things real quick that I want to highlight, that I want to talk about. So I remember this, Dolly the sheep. Some of our younger listeners may not remember this, but this information is from the Encyclopedia Britannica. It says, Dolly, female Finn Dorset sheep that lived from 1996 to 2003, was the first clone of an adult mammal produced by British developmental biologist Ian Wilmot and colleagues of the Rosalind Institute near Edmonton, Scotland. The announcement in February 1997. The announcement in February 1997 of Dolly's birth named a milestone in science, dispelling decades of presumption that adult mammals could not be cloned and igniting the debate concerning the many possible uses and misuses of mammalian cloning techniques. So what I'm going to say about that is humans are mammals. If this is what is being released, and this, we're talking 28 years ago, almost 3 decades ago. If this was the quote-unquote milestone that they were talking about then, we understand that we've advanced and evolved in sciences, or at least what they've released and told us. We have to understand that if they can clone one kind of mammal, it's not too far-fetched to think that other types of mammals can be cloned as well. here's another story. This is from Newsweek, and I'm trying to use what people would think are reputable news sources so they can't be disputed. This is from an article from April 19th of 2018. It said, whatever happened to the mouse with the ear on its back? Now, some people might remember that years ago there were pictures circulating of mice or a mouse that had a human ear growing on its back. Listen to this from Newsweek. You may have seen in a textbook or a TV a mouse with a human ear on its back. You might have thought that the mouse was genetically engineered or deformed or the result of mad scientists playing God. 20 years ago, Harvard surgeons Joseph and his brother Charles Vicente, along with MIT engineer Bob Langer, experimented with techniques to create human body parts in a lab. They implemented the shape of a human ear in the back of a mouse as part of the research to better understand how they could help grow body parts for humans. They published their results in 1997 after BBC aired a documentary on the tissue engineering the world saw the bizarre animal, the Vicente mouse. So one of my issues with mainstream sources is all the Orwellian double talk, where it says here that you might have thought the mouse was genetically engineered or deformed or the result of mad scientists playing God. But then it goes on to say that these guys experimented with techniques to create human body parts in a lab. I'm sorry, but that's genetic modification. That's genetic engineering. Call it what you like, but that's the definition. That's what it is. So we have this idea, the mouse with the ear. This happened in 1997. There must have been something going on in the water during that time. But here's something that I got from the MIT Technological Review, written by Emily Singer. Now, this was published May 27th, 2009. Once again, this is from the MIT Technological Review. Genetic engineered primates could lead to better models for studying disease. Last month in Japan, a very special marsupial monkey was born. One who inherited from his parents not only their marmoset DNA, but also a jellyfish gene for green fluorescent protein, GFP, that makes both the animal and his parents glow green under fluorescent light. The monkey's parents aren't the first primates to fluorescence, but they were the first to pass a genetically engineered trait to their offspring. Scientists hope to use the approach to create an animal models of neurological diseases such as Parkinson's, which cannot be adequately reproduced in rodents, the typical subjects of genetic engineering. So MIT is confessing the idea of genetic engineering. So it's like, man, how obvious or how obtuse do we have to be to not see what is really, really happening? And, you know, these are just a couple items. These are just a couple things that I just recall from my memory. I didn't even do a real deep dive because I don't even really see what the point is. You know, we see in USA Today, we see in the Encyclopedia Britannica, we see in the MIT Review and Newsweek that they are confessing to genetically engineering mammals, the different primates. They're doing these genetic hybrids, a lot of which the technology was pioneered during the Operation Paperclip. You can look that up. It is a thing. But that brings us today, and that brings me to the idea of why. Why are they introducing these genetically modified dire wolves? Why? And really, it's a gray wolf with genetically modified genes. And we don't know at this point what potential damage, what potential benefits could happen. Right now, I'm just looking at, going back to the Jurassic Park analogy where Jeff Goldblum, Dr. Ian Malcolm, the character, he said, your scientists were so preoccupied if they could. They never stopped to think if they should. And these aren't like the dodo birds that were killed off because they had no natural predator and, humans saw them, they were hungry, they just literally clobbed them over the head and started eating them till they went out of existence. Or like the buffalo. With the expansion of the West in the 1800s after the Civil War, the buffalo roamed the plains, and Native Americans used to consume every part of it. It was their primary life-sustaining substance, and people came and killed them, literally just for their fur. They would let the meat rot. When the train became a thing, they wiped them out pretty much to have transportation, so they wouldn't be hitting into the trains wouldn't be hitting the buffalo, so on and so forth. So these dire wolf, it wasn't something that was killed off because of man. It was killed off because its time had come. And why is this so important? Well, you can look at things like the government's involvement, during the Iraq War, and want to know about the tomb of Gilgamesh, who most believe was a Nephilim, who was a king of Uruk during the Babylonian age, and believe that this guy had the secret of immortality, which is kind of a funny thing that he had a tomb, but people believe that he was immortal. But, we see high-ranking people like Hillary Rodham Clinton, who through leaked emails was interested in the tomb of Gilgamesh. We see, like we discussed last week, the governments of the world being interested in the supernatural ability to access the spiritual realm. And for me, when I think about all this stuff, I come back to the Book of Enoch. And, the history of the Book of Enoch is really highly debated. I've read it. I think if you are sound in your spiritual doctrine, there's nothing wrong with reading it. I know Paul and Jude in the New Testament quoted it, and whether it was just like the nomenclature of the day or whether there's some significant spiritual benefit from it, you're going to have to determine that yourself. But the interesting thing is that this was removed. It's still in certain copies of the Ethiopian, the Coptic Bible, but up until the late 1880s, it was included in most Bibles. And the idea of reading Genesis 6 and those first 8 verses does not a lot of what happened. Why did God become so angry? Like, we don't really have the details. And I feel like in the Book of Enoch, chapter 6 to 11, there's a greater explanation. And I want to just briefly touch on it. I'm just going to hit a couple key verses from the Book of Enoch, and I'm going to bring it back around. So we read here in Enoch chapter 6 and verse 1, it says, "And it came to pass when the children of men had multiplied, that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters. The angels and the children of the heaven saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose our wives from among the children of men, and beget us children." Now, it goes on to say in the rest of chapter 6 here, one of the chief heavenly entities, whatever you want to call it, once again, it's highly debated. I personally believe that they were part of the fallen that were cast out of heaven, but the chief was Simgaza, who I hope I pronounced that right. But basically, he made a pact with these guys like, listen, God's going to be really ticked if we do this. So if we do this, we need to form a pact that we're going to stand together and we're going to take whatever punishment together. And basically, that's what happened. So let's look at Enoch chapter 7. So it talks about all the entities that were together in this pact. And then it goes on to say, "And all the others together with them took unto themselves wives, and each chose for himself one. And they began to go into them and to defile themselves with them. And they taught them charms and enchantments and the cutting of roots, and made them acquainted with plants. And they became pregnant, and they bore great giants who consumed all the acquisitions of men. And when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind. And they began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish, and to devour another's flesh and drink the blood. Then the earth laid accusation against the lawless ones." And Enoch chapter 8, "And Ezekiel taught men to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates, and made known to them metals of the earth and the art of working with them, and bracelets and ornaments, and the use of antimony, and the beautifying of the eyelids, and all kinds of costly stones, and all coloring tinctures. And there arose with godlessness and committed fornication, and they were led astray and became corrupt in all their ways. Semnuza taught enchantment. The head one taught enchantment and root cutting. Armos, the resolving of enchantments. Berequa taught astrology. Kokabe, the constellations. Ezekiel, knowledge of the clouds. Eriquil, signs of the earth. Semau, the signs of the sun. And Sinael, the course of the moon. And all men perished. They cried, and their cries went up to heaven. And what we find here is lore very similar to the idea of the Promethean fire. The quote-unquote gods in Greek and Roman mythology came down and taught men how to create fire, taught men these things that the quote-unquote gods did not want them to know. And what we see here are these entities came and taught divination. They taught what we would call modern day witchcraft. They taught how to make potions, how to make spells. They taught instruments of war. They taught how to harn metal. They taught how to harvest metal and how to harn it and to use it for weapons. And through that time, the godlessness began to increase. And as they multiplied, as these Nephilim, as these not fully human, not fully spiritual entities were created, they were unleashed upon the earth into the form of just defilement before the Lord. And once again, take what you want from the book of Enoch, but I think it really expounds on the reason why God was so upset and why God regretted making humans. And what we understand is that the spiritual genetic engineering of that time, what caused the annihilation of all but a handful of humans, once again, Noah and his wife and his sons and daughters-in-laws, what we understand from the increase of evil, the introduction into defilement and enchantments, casting spells, conjuring evil, all this stuff that we begin to see now more and more at the Grammy Awards, at the NFL halftime show, at these other things in public, we're now seeing that knowledge was unleashed at that time, which it grew. During that time, these giants, it says it absorbed all the acquisitions of men, which basically meant all the food that men farmed, all the cattle, everything was consumed by these giants to the point where they started consuming men, and then they started consuming one another, and then they started defile and detestable things with other animals. And I'm curious because as I read that, I often think about, like, you look at Egyptian hieroglyphics and you got these like bodies of a man with the head of a bird, or you even have these things like minotaurs, which is like a bull shaped as a man, or the centaurs, which is like half a horse and half a man. I'm just curious. This is just me thinking out of left field. Is like, I just wonder if it's possible, like these things had to be conjured up or thought up someplace at some time. So bringing this back to what Jesus tells us to be on the lookout for in Matthew 24, that's where I'm trying to answer the question of why. Why now? Why do we hear about these things? In my opinion, I don't see the reason that they've been created. I don't even say reintroduced, because technically it's these things existed, which we believe they did. They, through natural selection, were taken out. And they're not even pure. They are genetically engineered gray wolves when you boil it down. But when we look at Matthew 24, 37 to 39, and Jesus says, as it was in the days of Noah, so it'll be at the return of the Son of Man, we are starting to see these chemically, genetically engineered and mutated things. And even to the point where during COVID, and we've done episodes about this, where the mRNA genetically alters the DNA strand, the 23 genomic strand, where these mRNA vaccines through nanotechnology genetically altered the genomic strand, the DNA of human beings. And we're beginning to see this more and more. If we are just learning about these creatures that are being reintroduced, you look at these things, they're adorable, they're cute, and you're like, oh, I want one. I want to cuddle with one of them. And they're adorable. What they are 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, 2 months, 3 months is not what you look at now when they're like 5, 6 months as they get older. And this is just the tip of the iceberg of what we know. If they could reproduce and clone mammals 30 years ago, if they can grow genetically engineered human body parts off of mice, what do we not know? And I don't even know if it's important that we know this. What we do know is that Christ said we need to keep watch. We need to look, because when we see these things, we need to understand that his return, that 7-year period of time called the tribulation, will soon be upon us. And this, I believe, is a sign prophetically to those who are discerning, as the Lord warned us in Hosea 4:6, my people perish for a lack of knowledge. God is giving us insight, and God is revealing to us that the genetic mutilation, the genetic manipulation spiritually that occurred back in the time of Genesis 6, we are now seeing in a chemical, in a bioengineered scientific manner. And it boils down to the same thing. God loves his creation. He loves the humanity that he created. He filled the earth with wonderful and beautiful creatures for many different reasons. And it's like the robbing of innocence in abortion rituals, or not even operations. We see that the devil wants to hurt the heart of the Father. And I believe when you boil everything down, this is why this is coming to knowledge, why this is coming out and being released. And this is another kind of either a deep dive or kind of off the reservation. I don't know, take for what you will, but I think that there is insight, maybe not into what I have said, but into what the Lord is showing us. And I want to encourage you guys, study, look into these things, look into the Word of God, find and allow the Lord to speak to you as to what you need to know and be aware of, and keep watch. Jesus said, watch and pray that you will not be led into temptation. And the temptation with these things are, yeah, they're adorable. I want one. But are you being primed by something fuzzy and cute and adorable to bring in something that is spiritually devastating? Like the movie Gremlins, you look at Gizmo and he's cute, but the second you feed him After Dark, you got Gremlins. And that's where I'm just going to leave this episode. I'm going to pray. Father, I just ask right now that as you reveal things, as you show things to me, I ask that I've done a proper job communicating. And Lord, I pray right now that the spirit of wisdom and revelation would literally manifest and come upon the people that are listening. I ask, Lord, that you would draw them into deeper communion and deeper relationship with you, Jesus, that you be the one to lead them, to guide them into truth. I pray that anything that I have said that of my own imagination or my own creation or anything that is not of you would fall away and fade away, but that your word would remain, and that you and your truth would lead, guide, and direct everyone listening. And I ask, God, that you would open the eyes of everyone listening's heart and reveal to them who you are, Jesus. In your name, amen. So kind of another weird one, but I want to thank you guys for listening. Hopefully just me talking wasn't too boring and you guys got something out of it. But I want to thank and bless all you guys for listening. I want to thank you guys once again for sharing. Make sure you follow, make sure you subscribe, and also make sure you share. We're just asking you guys to continue to share, get the word out about what God's doing with this podcast, the information that he's given to us to give to you, because that's how we grow. That's how the people in our community, in our family, and in our lives get information that they can grow in the Lord, they can mature and become discerning on their own. You can find us anywhere podcasts start. Just search Flawedcast CLE. Apple, Spotify, Breaker, Anchor.fm. We are on the video platform Rumble. Just search Flawed Inc. You can find us on the Project Mockingbird social media, Facebook, X, Instagram, Getter, Gab, and Parler, all under Flawed Inc. In the description of this episode is a link to get a copy of my book, Smith's Heart of Man Repair Manual. I do have some on hand, so if you want one, if you want me to autograph it, let me know. I'd be happy to do that. Our email is flawedinccle@gmail.com. Questions, comments, or concerns, send them there. Message us on our social. But we will see you guys next week.